September of 2024 marks 23 years since one of the darkest days in our history. Now, last year I brought you guys the story of Edna Cintrone, who you might know as the Waving Woman. Now, when I did that video, a lot of people asked why I was so certain that this was Edna. Now, I know a lot of people choose to believe different things, but for me personally, I choose to believe the medical examiner's office and those who worked really hard on bringing the 9/11 memorial and museum to us. And it was them who confirmed that this was her long ago. And that's something I'll elaborate on just a little bit in today's video. I want to send my heartfelt condolences to all the families who were affected by that tragedy, especially the family of Yvette Moreno, who I'll be covering today. Now, I always handle my stories with the utmost respect, and this story won't be any different. While I'll be covering Yvette Moreno's life and her story, I'll also be covering numerous other stories that day that took place as that morning unraveled. Now, no matter what you might feel about what took place that day, the fact remains that this really happened. That this is something that affected a lot of us in different ways, from the first responders who were there who were affected long term to those who lost somebody. It's something to always be respected, and these people are to always be remembered. Because while some people might not grasp the seriousness of what happened, other people think about this every single day. I'm well aware that there are tragedies like this unraveling all over the world, but it doesn't mean that people have to just forget. It's important to always remember and respect what happened. With that being said, I do have to warn that today's video contains details that will be extremely difficult to hear, and I'll be discussing what unfolded that morning with images that are very hard to watch. So if that's too difficult for you to see at the moment, I completely understand, and I'll catch you next time. Rest in peace to all the lives lost, and may we never forget. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
And injuring more than 1,000. That happened in 1993. And now, once again, we're looking at pictures live of the World Trade Center where a plane minutes ago, just before 9, collided with the building.
And this is, of course, a building, a complex in which literally tens of thousands of people work. It was a major problem back when that bombing happened because it simply affected so many people. And now, once again, we have this accident happening here. Now, as you can see, we're looking about 3/4 of the way up this 110-story building where the smoke is coming out.
It was coming from the north, heading south towards the tower, and I see another plane approaching right now. Another plane just crashed in right now.
Another plane has into the World Trade Center building. As we are watching the World Trade Center covering the earlier crash, we have seen that another plane just crashed into the World Trade Center building. As we are watching it, this is unbelievable.
Two planes appear to me now to have done this intentionally.
Whoa! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh Jesus! Oh my God! Oh! Oh my God!
It fell. It just fell. The second building just fell.
And it hit everything around it.
This is perhaps the most horrific sight anyone could have witnessed in a lifetime. I cannot believe my eyes, and I am still in shock as to what I witnessed just moments ago.
Absolute, incomprehensible mayhem.
A lot of people were breaking down and crying.
The fire continues to burn. I can see the flames through the thick smoke. Now people are gathering in large groups. In fact, in one plane. As I stand on the Manhattan Bridge, which is closed, it is open to pedestrian traffic. Some people are already in France, but there's just no way for them to. As I look at it, something is. I can't. Is this the building is going? Is that the building going down? Is that the second building of the World Trade Center going down?
Yes, that is the second tower.
In September of 2001, thousands walked the streets of New York City, ready to start another day and go about their daily routine as normal. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was another beautiful morning in the Big Apple. But a little before 9 a.m., the world would watch on as something horrific unfolded, and everything shifted from beautiful to utter devastation. And at the end of it all, Manhattan's financial district would look nothing like it did when the morning started, with the streets left in ruins and nearly 3,000 lives no longer with us. And for one family, the search for their missing loved one, who was in the North Tower during all the chaos but able to escape, would only lead to more questions when it was learned that her cell phone somehow made it back to the Bronx, but she never did. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, this is Coming Home, the story of Yvette Moreno.
Hosing down the smoldering remains of what is left of the World Trade Center area. They are not giving up hope that they might find more people alive.
Yvette Nicole Moreno was born on October 4th of 1976 and was raised in the Bronx. Yvette was born to her mother Ivy, and they resided near Olmsted Avenue and Black Rock Ave with Yvette's younger brother. The Puerto Rican family had roots in the Bronx, with Yvette's mother also having been born there. While some of these blocks were at times known to be a little quieter than other sections of the borough back then, the greater Bronx was a different story. It was a time of uncertainty, violence, and could be a huge challenge for anyone raising small children. But it was also a borough filled with families and neighbors who had built friendships over time. Always a strong sense of community, despite the ups and downs. Yvette's mother worked hard for her children, and she was raising them on her own. She worked at a law firm on Wall Street by the name of Sullivan and Cromwell. By the time Yvette was born, she had been working there for a few years already, and would eventually work her way up to becoming the manager of the law firm. She had devoted much of her time to her career, but also made sure to set a good example for her two kids, remaining a devoted mother above anything. She would often bring the kids by the office while they were very young. The kids would get to know her co-workers, and they became familiar faces. They always came by, and they enjoyed being there. Ever since she was a baby, Yvette was known by her family and loved ones to be a very happy child, always wearing a vibrant smile, what some described as a, quote, Kool-Aid smile. She was always in the best of spirits, always happy and cheerful. She attended Holy Family Grammar School, located at Castle Hill Ave and Black Rock Ave, just around a 5-minute walk from the family's home. While here, she made a lot of friends and was well liked. Known for always being bright and motivated, her smile was one that some would call contagious. But it wasn't just that, it was the energy that came with it, always positive. It was a big reason so many found themselves fast friends with her. Everyone genuinely liked being around her. Yvette's kind-hearted nature and personality made it very easy to like her. Even after leaving Holy Family School, she would leave a lasting impression on everybody she had met. After this, she would attend St. Catherine Academy in the Bronx. And here, it was no different. She made plenty of good friends and was always focused, even at her young age. When she was 12 years old, Yvette's mother would put her in a mentoring program called Big Brothers, Big Sisters of America. She was enrolled from 1988 to 1993. The idea of the program was to pair children with someone older than them that they could spend time with, to do activities outdoors, and to confide in, to be a positive influence on the child in the way an older sibling would be. Her mother worked a lot, very long hours each day. So being that she wasn't able to do certain things because of her long hours at work, she thought that the program would be a good idea for her daughter. She felt that Yvette having someone to experience new things with was important. Things like exploring the city and getting to know about the diverse culture all around. Yvette was paired with a woman named Joanne. She, like Yvette, grew up in the Bronx, raised by a single mother, and attended Catholic schools just like she did. She also understood the challenges faced by kids who grew up in the borough. In a lot of ways, Yvette reminded her of herself. She knew how easy it could be for a kid to be influenced and take the wrong path. She would take her to parks, beaches, the mall, and just around the city, with their bond becoming stronger over time. They became very close, seeing each other every other weekend, and even getting to know each other's family and friends over the years that they had been connected. Yvette loved being a part of the program, even working there part-time as a receptionist while in high school and during some summers. She stood at St. Catherine Academy and completed the 11th grade, but for her senior year, she would transfer to Stevenson High School in the Soundview section of the Bronx. The public school was a lot different from St. Catherine Academy, but it didn't slow her down. She quickly made friends. Some of them she already knew from around the way. Still as focused as ever, she would end up graduating from Stevenson as a top student. Throughout the years, from when she was young all through high school, Yvette's bond with her brother and her mom would become stronger and stronger. She was extremely close to her brother, and when it came to her mom, they were starting to become best friends, always talking, going out together, visiting nice restaurants, and catching shows on Broadway. Yvette's mom wanted her daughter to always know that this big city had a lot to love. So many different people, languages, cultures, and personalities. If they had a chance to experience some of that together, they were always up for it. She had raised a thoughtful and loving daughter, and she was proud of the person she was becoming. She considered herself blessed to have a daughter like Yvette, someone who confided in her about everything, someone she had such a tight bond with, her daughter and friend who was coming into her own. Yvette was now entering adulthood, continuing to grow as a person. She loved being out and about, sometimes going to clubs in Lower Manhattan to dance with her friends, other times just to take in the city. She was still that vibrant person wearing a big smile with a memorable laugh. She had a very supportive family and a lot of friends who had a great deal of trust in her and cared about her. Everything in her life was going exactly as planned, and it seemed that she was always thinking of her next step, having fun and creating memories with those she loved, but also sticking to her studies, always with her eyes fixated on a book of some sort. She loved to read. It was said that she was known to walk and read at the same time. Not the safest thing, but it was as if she couldn't get enough of whatever she had been absorbing at that moment. She could often be found at the Barnes & Noble that was located in Bay Plaza on Sundays, sitting on the couch and reading for hours on end. Aside from her relationships with her mother and brother, she would also remain close to Joanne, her big sister from the program years before. Even after Yvette was no longer in the Big Brother Big Sisters program, they would keep in contact and met up whenever they could. She would also continue to attend Big Brother Big Sister events, showing support and helping out whenever possible. After her high school graduation, Yvette attended Hunter College for 3 years and would end up on the dean's list while there. She majored in sociology with a minor in psychology. When she started to think of what she wanted to do for a career, she thought to herself she wanted to be a good influence on children the way her big sister program had been for her. She thought it might be a good idea to become a guidance counselor for teens who needed to be steered in a more positive direction. She understood that a lot of kids in the 5 boroughs didn't always have the resources necessary to thrive. She said herself that if not for the BBBS program, she might have been swallowed up by the streets. She was quoted as saying, "If it wasn't for big brothers, big sisters, I probably would have been lost to the streets of the South Bronx." She was happy that she was fortunate enough to have the proper guidance and parenting, and she wanted to do her part for kids who might need the same. If the guidance counselor route didn't pan out, she also had ideas of possibly being a school social worker. By January of 2001, Yvette was starting the year off in a big way. Her experience at Big Brothers Big Sisters would lead her to a brand new job. She was now, officially, a receptionist for Carr Futures, a global brokerage firm. She had been working with them since the year 2000 as a temp, but would become officially hired at the beginning of 2001. The company's headquarters were in Chicago, but they had offices in New York City, located at the World Trade Center. Their offices were on the 92nd floor of the North Tower. She was very excited to be working there. The area was busy, and it's almost like a place working under its own timing. If you happen to slow down and take a look around you, it can feel like everyone is in a hurry. Most of the times, they are. But she adjusted quickly. She could be seen with co-workers having lunch in different places on Wall Street and right around the job, those towers high above her. Anytime someone asked her how work was going, she expressed how happy she was with the company, like the time she ran into a friend on the train. It had been a while since they'd seen each other. Yvette was happy to bump into her. They caught up during a quick commute, where Yvette expressed being very happy about her new position. This was shortly after she had become officially hired. She talked with her friend about making plans down the line, since they had always enjoyed each other's company in the past. Any old friends who bumped into her here and there felt the same way. It was genuinely pleasant being around her. During the summer of 2001, Yvette met with her mother and Joanne to grab dinner at a restaurant called Cabanas down at the South Street Seaport. She had graduated from Hunter and was now a student at Lehman College, continuing with school and looking forward to getting her master's degree. She was working at Carr Futures and going to school at the same time. It wasn't easy doing both, but she was more than happy to. She was due to graduate in May of the following year. She was single and living with her mother and brother. She was in no rush to go anywhere because she genuinely loved being around them. Their company was always welcome. She told Joanne all about the new job and her plans for the future. Joanne knew that the girl she had remembered being her little sister was well on her way to achieving great things. Her nails were done, so was her hair, and she was dressed professionally, growing into her new role. She would also mention that she was saving her money to buy her first car, and Joanne had no doubts that she would make it happen. In her own words, Yvette was doing everything she set out to do. As someone who had built such a strong bond with her, she was, of course, extremely proud. By September of 2001, Yvette had already gotten into a daily routine where she would leave her home in the Bronx and make the trek downtown to work. She would be one of 140 employees at Carr Futures offices at the time. The corporate world suited her well. She loved it, and she was looking forward to making her next move and getting her master's degree. But on one beautiful morning, the 11th of September 2001, Yvette would find herself going to work and instead being faced with unspeakable horror and a level of chaos that she couldn't see coming. The skies were as blue as ever, not one cloud visible. A lot of times, it's the first thing you hear about when people describe that morning. It was so perfect out, it was hard to ignore. The morning was unfolding like any other. On the ground, thousands of people walking through the 5-acre Tobin Plaza outside, entering the towers and other buildings to head to their offices, ready to get their workday started. The plaza was named after Austin Joseph Tobin, director of the Port of New York Authority from 1942 until 1972. The name was later changed to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey in order to properly address the fact that they were an agency with footprints and lots of work in both New Jersey and New York City. If you've ever taken a bus at the Port Authority bus terminal, taken a PATH train to or from Jersey, or taken a flight from LaGuardia, JFK, or Newark, they're all run by the Port Authority. During the summers at the plaza, they'd often have events for people of all ages, all a part of a series of events called Center Stage at the World Trade Center. You could find people here all day, or enjoying themselves after a long day of work. You could find children dancing and getting their energy out. In the middle of the plaza, you had the Sphere, created by German sculptor Fritz Koenig. The sculpture sat mounted on a stone platform that was surrounded by water from the plaza fountain. People would sit on the benches that surrounded the unique piece, while countless others had grown used to seeing it as they came and went. Everything about this space was unique. The different mix of people from all over, the liveliness, the musical performances, the north and south towers high above. It was more than where work was located. It was considered one of New York City's great open spaces, and still evolving. But just a few hours later, the entire plaza would look entirely different, telling a story of horror and extreme human suffering. In the North Tower, it was a busy day as usual. At the very top was the Windows on the World restaurant, which opened up in 1976, located on the 106th and 107th floors. Restaurants Wild Blue, previously called Cellar in the Sky, and The Greatest Bar on Earth were also located here. It was a very popular place. Most of the time, the place was filled with hundreds who came to get a taste of the wine menu, the food, and last but not least, astonishing views of the Manhattan skyline. They employed around 450 people who spoke more than 60 languages. With so many people coming from all over the globe to conduct business, this was definitely a plus. Windows on the World was a very appropriate name for the place. That view was unlike anything else. It isn't every day that someone would get to see the city from this perspective. Nerve-wracking for some to be so high up, but it was also breathtaking. At around 8 a.m., different businessmen and women would sit at tables at Windows on the World to grab breakfast and discuss work. Risk Waters Group was having a meeting in one of the conference rooms located on the 106th floor. Both 106 and 107 were busy, as waiters went from table to table taking orders and filling cups of coffee. Some enjoyed their slices of smoked salmon, while others waited for their guests to show up. A lot of those who had been at the restaurant were there on a weekly basis. It was something plenty did often. Several floors below, on 92, was the office for Carr Futures. Things were busier than usual for them that morning, with a lot of people walking the floors of the office. A group of brokers for the parent company of Carr Futures were due to have a special meeting at around 8 a.m. and gathered together for it in a conference room, as planned. Yvette would normally arrive at the World Trade Center early, making her way into the North Tower and taking the trip from the lobby to 92 via elevator. She was well known and liked on the 92nd floor. She always conducted herself like a professional and had a smile on her face whenever speaking to the many who'd come and go. In September of the year 2000, a video was recorded by credit analyst Trisha Collins. The video shows everyday life at the offices of Carr Futures, and when she directs her attention to the receptionist, Yvette can be seen waving at the camera.
Okay, one more view. Is there a receptionist?
Her big smile is unmistakable. Every floor of the tower was filled with people who, just like her, arrived to do their jobs and conduct business. But less than an hour after those conferences started, as breakfast meetings continued above, those inside of the North Tower would be the first to experience the utter chaos and terror that would soon change everything. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 flew over the buildings of Manhattan's financial district, so low that the loud roar of its engines could be heard from blocks away. As pedestrians looked up, they would be shocked to see the huge Boeing 767 aircraft as it crashed right into the North Tower, creating a huge fireball and causing instant devastation. So many lives taken in an instant. It was a normal morning just a minute before this, and now people who had survived the impact of that crash in the building found themselves thrown off their feet as the building rocked back and forth like they'd never felt before. The lights flickered on and off, and cracks would begin to form all over the walls. People who were below the impact zone didn't know what hit them, but they could see the debris as it rained from above. In their hearts, they knew that something had gone terribly wrong. On the outside, nobody understood exactly what was happening yet. Some saw the plane hit, while others just saw the large fireball created by the crash. Many assumed that this had to be an accident. How could anyone crash into one of the towers? They're impossible to miss. In a matter of seconds, the beautiful morning had now morphed into a horrifying scene filled with destruction, reminiscent of something that you would see in a Hollywood film, except this was very real. Flight 11 would carry passengers and crew members who would all perish instantly. The aircraft also carried about 10,000 gallons of jet fuel and was flying at around 470 miles an hour, easily piercing the steel and concrete the tower was made of. The hole in the building went from floors 94 to 99 as the plane hit at an angle. Smoke billowed out of the huge hole as fires raged on and quickly spread across the floors, largely thanks to the jet fuel the aircraft let loose after the impact. The massive blast would send office supplies, plane parts, computers, and furniture out of the hole and from the windows. At first, it was hard to understand exactly how bad it was. Thousands ran for their lives below, trying their best to make it out of harm's way, dodging the concrete and glass that rained down. Papers that were blasted out of the offices fell to the pavement. A lot of people who hadn't seen the destruction unfold thought that there was some sort of ticker tape parade going on nearby, something you would see when the Yankees win a World Series. But it would all become clear as time went on. Those who had been eating and working at Windows on the World before this would find themselves more than 100 stories up, trapped above the impact zone, with absolutely no way to escape. On the 92nd floor, those who had been in the conference room from Carr Futures were in the middle of their meeting when the plane came crashing directly above them. The entire building swayed back and forth from the force, with walls and ceilings breaking and door frames twisting from their original positions. Now, those inside the conference room couldn't make it out, but they were all alive. About 40 others who were on the floor at Carr Futures offices ended up making their way to what was described as an unfinished space in the office. This is known because as it happened, phone calls to loved ones started to come in from that office. Some people sent emails to friends, family, and other co-workers from offices above the impact zone. Some of those emails described the conditions inside the towers and what people were doing to try to help themselves. Others would ask what exactly was going on, because from where they were, they couldn't understand or imagine what had taken place. One email from a man inside would read, "Any news from the outside?" hoping that some sort of help was on the way, trying to make sense of everything. Just a few minutes after the North Tower was hit, Windows on the World was filling with black smoke at terrifying speed. The restaurant's manager, Doris, tried her best to follow their fire safety training and get everyone to a place that they could breathe. She made several calls to the lobby of the tower, where the fire command center was, and each time she did, she asked, "What do we do? What do we do?" The situation was dire and getting worse by the second. All those answering the calls could do is tell those stuck inside to try their best to cover their faces and any openings with towels or whatever they could find. But they were struggling. They started off trying their best to be positive, but panic was beginning to set in. More emails and calls came from inside. Those sending the emails were becoming desperate and seeking any answers they could. Whenever callers were lucky enough to get through to emergency services, they were told to hang on, help was on the way. And it was, but they couldn't see what we saw. In a way, it was almost like they were cut off from the rest of the world, with no idea what really caused this or the motive behind it. One email came from a man named Peter Alderman. He used his BlackBerry to message his sister. The email described the non-stop wave of smoke. He told her, "I'm scared." By this point, the raging fires and heat were spreading everywhere. The floors and ceilings were starting to buckle above and under anyone on those upper floors. Water ran down the walls from the severed pipes. the flames continued to spread. The fire suppression systems in place at the tower couldn't even begin to put out the flames. It was just too much. About 20 minutes after the crash, NYPD helicopter pilots who had been communicating with their base would relay awful news. They wouldn't be able to land on the roof for a possible rescue. The structure was just too unstable. The tower had so much smoke coming from the top that it was impossible to land safely or help anybody. But those inside had no idea. They were hopeful that someone would make it to them. One man named Ivan Louis Carpio worked at Windows, and he left a message on his cousin's answering machine as this was all happening. He said the following: "I can't go anywhere because they told us not to move. I have to wait for firefighters." It wasn't that firefighters weren't trying. They were doing everything they could. But a catastrophe of this magnitude, there just weren't many options. From the street, people couldn't help but look on in horror, knowing that there had to be a lot of people in the building, still unable to grasp exactly how bad this situation was. The sidewalks littered with twisted burning metal, glass, work documents that once filled file cabinets and stood on desks inside the offices, and luggage that belonged to those on Flight 11. If you were to just wake up in the middle of all this chaos, it would feel like Earth was facing a cataclysmic event. And for those at Ground Zero, that's exactly what this was. As people looked on, it would take a few minutes to make sense of what they were starting to see. Bodies of those stuck in the towers, falling from the broken windows down to the pavement. Within minutes of the first plane hitting the North Tower, news stations all across the world were broadcasting the devastation as it unfolded. From Manhattan to Brooklyn to the Bronx to the rest of the city, we were all starting to learn more of what was happening. But while the North Tower was already in disarray, with so much confusion and havoc unfolding, the situation would become much worse at 9:03 a.m. when another plane, Flight 175, crashed through the South Tower. The same level of fright, horror, and pandemonium was now being felt in Tower 2. Many assumed they were safe here at first. Many had evacuated the South Tower once the North Tower was hit, while others stood where they were, since they believed this to likely be an isolated incident. Other people returned to their offices in the South Tower after already making their way out, believing it was safe, being assured that they could go back because everything was under control. But with that second plane hitting the South Tower, one thing we were all sure of was that we were under attack. The level of suffering taking place in those towers was unfathomable. The fear alone would be enough to paralyze someone. Those in the North Tower could hear the moment that another aircraft went through the South, the loud crash and explosion, the horrified screams of onlookers. They couldn't be too sure from inside, but from what they were hearing and feeling, whatever this was, it was horrible. Some who were lucky enough to make it out alive were bleeding profusely with numerous injuries. People stuck inside could be seen desperately piling up into the broken window frames as plumes of toxic smoke rose into the sky, trying as best as they could to get some air and to keep away from the intense flames spreading behind them. There was a time when people looked at the towers from the street in amazement, like when the human fly climbed one of the towers back in the 70s. But today, they looked on with shocked expressions for totally different reasons. Reality would begin to set in for those who'd made it to safety or were watching from home. Many would begin to think about how many people they knew who worked in those towers and how many people might have been in there when this started, trying to grasp just how many lives might have been lost in an instant. But the next thing on the minds of many across the city and the rest of the country was were their loved ones okay? Communications were down for a lot of people, and it seemed as if everything was happening at once. Some phones worked, allowing people to make calls, as mentioned, but for many others, all they got was dead air when trying to call people in the towers. It only led to a crippling fear, and at a time like this, it was hard not to assume the worst, especially when you're watching something so unbelievable happen before your eyes. One of those phone calls that did make it out of Ground Zero came from Yvette. It was stated that about 20 minutes after the first tower was hit, she made a call to her family, letting them know that she was okay. She spoke to her brother, telling him that she made it to safety and was no longer in the North Tower. She said she had made it out and was coming home to the Bronx. She would also say it was probably best if their mother didn't go to work that morning, since her mother worked just minutes away from her, and it was obviously not safe. The call ended, and as they waited for her arrival, the morning in downtown Manhattan only became much worse. As the fires raged on in the South Tower, the steel structure would begin to weaken from the extreme heat and jet fuel. With each floor of the towers being about an acre in size, and everyone and everything inside of them, including the steel and concrete that made it all up, the weight was too much. At 9:59 a.m., from the top down, floor after floor would begin to collapse, making it impossible for the tower to stay standing. 110 stories would come crashing down, with many still alive inside, feeling themselves go down with the building. And it all happened in a matter of seconds. The sound of those massive floors collapsing above, mixed with the twisting steel, created a thunderous roar as the pedestrians below ran for their lives. The devastation that was taking place high above the ground was now a major threat to the thousands that lined the sidewalks and streets. Screams for help could be heard as people tried to get away. Many were fleeing the North Tower as the South came down, using every last bit of energy they had to try and get somewhere safe. Every corner they turned, no matter how fast they ran, they were followed by a cloud of thick gray dust, a cloud made up of pulverized steel, broken glass, and everything else that was burning inside. Many would have no choice but to just seek shelter wherever they were, as the view outside changed from bright and beautiful to pitch black, and they had no idea what to do. No clue if help was coming, or if the ground beneath them would crumble next. The uncertainty left many feeling like they would never make it back home to their loved ones. At this point, those inside of the North Tower could do nothing but hear the rumble and feel everything around them shake as if it were an earthquake. Some thought that it was the North Tower falling as they were inside, unaware that it was actually the South Tower, a building that was no longer standing. Sometime between 10 and 10:25 a.m., several videos show intense fires now beginning to quickly spread across the 92nd floor of Tower 1. And at 10:18 a.m., another phone call would come in from those trapped inside the North Tower conference room of Carr Futures. The call was coming from a man named Tom McGinnis, and he was calling his wife, Ileana. Normally, he wouldn't be in the North Tower. He would be at the Mercantile Exchange building, not far, but he was there at 8 a.m. for the special meeting at Carr Futures. This looks really, really bad. This is bad for the country. It looks like World War III, he said to his wife. She had been hoping that his meeting finished up early and that he made it out, but something about the tone in his voice sounded off, like he wasn't sure what was going to happen. His wife replied asking him if he was okay, wanting to know his condition. He would explain to her that he was stuck inside of the conference room with others, and they had no way of getting out. The impact right above them caused the walls to crack and the floors above to cave in. She tried her best to keep him calm, told him not to lose his cool, but she was also scared. That's when Tom said, "I love you. Take care of Caitlin." He was referring to their daughter, who had just turned only 4 years old. It was like he knew he wouldn't survive whatever was coming next. She kept trying to reassure her husband that he would be okay. They just had to keep holding on. His response to her was chilling. He said, "You don't understand. There are people from the floors above us." She asked him to stay on the phone. She didn't want him to hang up, but he would tell her that he needed to get on the floor to take cover. He used this opportunity to let his family know that he loved them. A few moments after that, they were disconnected. It's hard to grasp what the people in those offices experienced, trapped with no way out. The sheer panic that has set in, watching as people fell or wondering how bad it had to be above them. But those watching from below had a different view. Some described seeing people falling from the towers at such a close distance that they could see what they were wearing and even remember their faces. They felt helpless as they watched, unable to help or stop it. It was almost like time was moving slow. One user, who simply goes by the name G on YouTube, uploaded a video in September of 2020 where he described seeing many on the towers as his parents listened. The footage taken was less than 2 months after the attack, and it's obviously still the hardest thing to speak about. He stated that he saw what looked like the souls of victims leaving their bodies right before they hit on the ground, almost like some unknown force came at the last second and carried them away before their life ended. He felt that he wanted to share his experience with others who, like him, struggled. Some would witness the harrowing moments through the lens of their cameras, capturing the last moments of many. On the 94th floor, just 2 stories above Tom and the rest in that conference room, was Edna Cintrone, known to many as the Waving Woman, who we've discussed here before. She held on, standing in the center of the huge hole created by Flight 11. Others were spotted around Edna in various photos and videos. This disaster looked entirely different to them. There was truly nowhere to go. All they could do is watch and listen to everything going on around them. Many have questioned how anyone knows this was really Edna. The truth is, it seems that this was always known. A huge canvas of that well-known photo sits in the 9/11 Memorial Museum, taken by fashion photographer Roberto Raben. He was en route to a fashion show, but when the North Tower was hit, he made his way to a vantage point and began taking pictures. Under that canvas at the museum, it makes it clear that the woman wearing a blue blouse and white pants was indeed later identified as Edna Cintrone. Whether it be through videos or photos that were never made public, or through other means of investigation, the Memorial Museum and Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that this was her. That information is still available at the museum today. Many others couldn't be identified. Other videos captured by cameraman Jack Toluccio show the aftermath of the attack, showing the plaza and all of the smoking wreckage that covered the ground, abandoned fruit stands from the nearby farmers market, and first responders entering the towers on their way to rescue anyone they could. In one of his clips, a man can be seen trying to use a jacket or cloth of some type to possibly get into the window next to his, and using it to push away the smoke. A few seconds later, he attempts to lower himself in what might have been an attempt to break the window under him, but he loses his grip, tragically falling off the tower. His footage would also capture the last heroic moments of Denise Conley from Kansas City, known to her family as Niecy. She was a former member of the Coast Guard and working as a security guard in the North Tower. She was already done with her shift at work, but when this happened, she went back to help. The footage captures just 20 seconds as she holds the door open for firefighters as they make their way in. It was the last known footage of her alive. From the moment the first plane hit and throughout the next almost 2 hours, different levels of indescribable terror were being captured, including the grounds of the plaza, covered in human remains. Those who watched it happen left in absolute shock, with fear written all over their faces. The grounds of the World Trade Center were a danger zone, and at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower would also come crashing down to the pavement, with those who were trapped still inside coming down with it. 110 stories, now just a cloud of smoke, tons of steel, concrete, and everything else collapsing into its own footprint. The magnitude of what was happening was surreal. First responders knew that this morning was unlike anything they'd ever seen, but they stood. They tried to keep helping. They thought of all the life that remained in those towers. Some who weren't first responders also tried to help, putting others before themselves. In the distance, the sounds of firefighters' pass devices chirping from underneath the mountains of rubble. These devices are worn by firefighters. That way, if they're ever trapped somewhere or unable to move, the chirping would make it easier to locate them. But on this morning, it was a frightening reminder of just how many of New York's bravest never made it out. At the end of it all, nearly 3,000 lives were taken that morning, with casualties also at the Pentagon and an aircraft crashing in Stony Brook Township in Pennsylvania, leaving countless friends and family members overwhelmed with a level of anguish that would be difficult for a lot of us to truly understand. The towers were gone, and so many innocent lives went with them. As the day went on and all through the night, officers, firefighters, EMS, and other volunteers would begin the almost impossible task of recovering bodies from that rubble. The terror from hours before was over, but this was truly just the beginning. In order to recover victims, people would work together, and everyone involved knew just how much of a daunting task this would be. But they went to work, never thinking twice. With the trains down, thousands walked home after, covered in soot and shattered glass. But they made it home, able to see their loved ones again, thankful to be alive. But Yvette, who called her family early on to let them know that she was coming home, still hadn't arrived. Was she walking? Did she stop somewhere? Did she become hurt after making it out? Was she at the hospital? Was she with someone from work? All questions that we'd all be asking ourselves. They hadn't heard a word from her since that phone call 20 minutes after the first plane hit. All they could ask themselves was, where did Yvette go? Minutes turned to hours, and hours turned to days. They had no answers. There was no sign of her. They were keeping positive, but they were also becoming more anxious. It was this uncomfortable feeling, an uncertainty they couldn't ignore. All they could do was continue to search for her, hoping that she would turn up somewhere safely. But every day felt longer than the last. Yvette's face was now all over missing persons posters in the Bronx and Manhattan. She was one of the many who were now considered missing. The pictures of the missing were printed in newspapers across the city with the hope that it would help people be found. If you were anywhere near Ground Zero or around the 5 boroughs after this happened, you would often come across walls of faces on the street. Nobody was giving up, even if they feared the worst. But in the coming weeks, down at Pier 94, families were undergoing the heartbreaking process of turning the missing into the legally dead as they applied for death certificates for their loved ones, just about the hardest thing they would ever do. Ground Zero was now an open space with mountains of debris, smoke, flames still burning, and hundreds of men, women, and search canines looking for signs of life. It wouldn't be easy, but those helping knew they had to keep going, even if it was becoming more and more difficult with every passing minute. But out of nowhere, on Wednesday, September 19th, just a little over a week after the attacks, Yvette's family would receive a very surprising phone call at their home. A call shrouded in mystery, with information they did not expect. The call was coming from a woman they didn't know. The woman explained that she was calling them because while she was walking on 205th Street in the Bronx, a man approached her, asking her if she wanted to buy a cell phone. The phone seemed to be stolen, but she was still interested, so she went into the phone's contacts and found the number that belonged to the cell phone and dialed it to see if it actually worked. But when she called the number of this phone that had been offered to her, it was the voice recording left on the phone that got her attention. This phone that this random man was selling on the street belonged to Yvette Moreno. On the other end of the line was a recording done by a woman named Andrea, Yvette's good friend. The recording stated that Yvette was there on the 11th of September when the attacks took place, and she was currently missing, and that anyone with information on Yvette's whereabouts should contact her family. She also left a contact number. The number left in the voice recording was to Yvette's home in the Bronx. The woman called the number right away. When Yvette's mother heard this news, a wave of emotions came over her. It would instantly raise so many questions. If her cell phone was in the Bronx, where was she? How did her phone get into the hands of a random stranger? Surely she made it to the Bronx as well. After all, she said she was on her way to the Bronx when they last heard from her. Maybe she did make it, after all, but there was no way to be sure. Yvette's mother would write down information concerning this mystery man, as the woman who called gave a description of him. He was said to be around 6'3", light-skinned, with short hair. It gave the family new hope that Yvette was out there, and maybe closer than anyone thought. The news was so shocking to hear, and she was so excited about a new development that she ended the phone call without getting the woman's name. They called police immediately with their new lead, asking them to check the Bedford Park area where her phone was said to be. But when they searched up and down those blocks, they couldn't find anyone matching his description. He was nowhere to be found. Yvette's friends and family were now facing a different situation altogether. They thought that only one of two scenarios could be possible. Either Yvette made her way to the Bronx after the attack like she said she would, possibly being met with foul play when making it there, or she was hurt after exiting the North Tower after she called her family. And maybe her cell phone was just somewhere lying in the street amongst the debris, leading to someone taking the phone with them when they came across it sometime later. They just truly had no idea what all of this meant. That phone call would give Yvette's family new hope in the search for her. But once again, hope was beginning to fade. Days and nights just kept passing, and they still had no clue where she could be, or why her cell phone made it to the Bronx while she was still missing. They would dial Yvette's number constantly, hoping for an answer, and it was still working, ringing like it normally would. Whatever it was that happened to her was still a mystery, but that would all change very soon. Almost a month after the attacks, about 2 weeks after that mysterious call about her phone somehow making it to the Bronx, Yvette Moreno's body was found not far from the North Tower, where she lost her life after being struck by debris that fell from the South Tower just minutes after Flight 175 came crashing into it. It seemed that as she made her escape from the North Tower, whatever came down from the south would get to her before she could get further away. Some reports stated she was hit by falling debris, while others say she lost her life when the South Tower collapsed. But she called her family 20 minutes after the first plane hit, saying she had made it out safely, which means the South Tower was either just hit as she exited, or it had already been hit minutes before while she was still inside. The South Tower was hit at 9:03 a.m. and wouldn't collapse until 9:59 a.m. Chances are that had she escaped 20 minutes after the first plane hit her tower, as reported, she wouldn't have been anywhere near the towers when the South came down, almost an hour later. It was more likely that it was debris that did this, not the collapse. Again, that's if the timeline provided was accurate. There were also reports that her body was found under a collapsed walkway, while others stated that she was found on an overpass. But while some details were unclear, they were sure of one thing: Yvette had made it out after all. She made that call to her family, letting them know that she was safe, not knowing that it would be the very last time she would ever speak to them. And one of the craziest parts of all of this would be that Yvette was found on October 4th of 2001, on what would have been her 25th birthday. Items recovered from the scene would include Yvette's pager, a set of Hunter University pins where she attended, a gold bracelet, an NYPD necklace, and her Carr Futures ID card. Many questions remained. Who was it that called them to let them know about Yvette's phone? Who was the man trying to sell it? And how exactly did he get his hands on it? Especially in the middle of all that chaos. It was all very unsettling, and it only added to the confusion. But the horrible truth was now known. As you'd imagine, it was a crippling grief that hit those who knew her extremely hard, especially her family. A few days after her body was found, her mother was quoted as saying, "We never gave up hope, but now we have to accept that my beautiful angel has gone to a different place." After weeks of searching the streets, checking hospitals, and after hundreds of search and rescue teams from across the country carefully sifted through mountains of debris, Yvette was finally coming home. The items recovered were given to her family and later donated by them to the 9/11 Memorial Museum. Sometime after she was found, a service was held for Yvette Moreno, where more than 750 people would attend. Those who came to pay their respects would travel from places like Florida, Virginia, Washington, and of course, the Bronx. A big collage put together by friends and family showed Yvette through the years, from when she was a child all the way up to adulthood. And in every photo displayed, she wore that big smile that she was known for. Those closest to her, of course, struggled to cope with the immense loss. They were happy she was found and grateful to be celebrating her memory. Not all families had an opportunity to have a service for their loved ones that they lost. Those who had felt fortunate enough to meet Yvette were happy to have known her, but it was also bittersweet. She should have still been here, carrying out her dreams, laughing with her friends, making more plans for her future. Instead, she was one of thousands who lost her life after getting caught in the middle of a truly hateful act. Her mother was quoted as saying the following: "She was always happy. She was beautiful inside and out. I was really blessed to have her as a daughter. I miss her so much." Her mother would also credit her with saving her life after she called that morning saying she should stay home. Yvette's body would then be laid to rest at St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. After the truth was learned of where Yvette was, and after her body was found, her big sister from the program, Joanne, would visit the family home to be supportive and offer condolences to the family. And sitting out front was a brand new car, a Mitsubishi. Yvette's brother was giving it a polish, and the car belonged to Yvette. The car was so new that it still had temporary plates and that fresh car smell. She had saved her money just like she said she would, and purchased it a week before the attacks. It was just a reminder of the type of person she was, someone who always knew what she wanted and worked hard to make it happen. The woman who made the call to her family about her cell phone was never addressed in future articles, and when it came to the man who was said to be selling Yvette's phone on the streets of the Bronx, he was never found. Yvette Moreno would be one of 69 employees that Carr Futures lost that morning. The unimaginable suffering and last moments of thousands that day would leave countless friends and family members grieving till this very day. Every time September rolls around, it's a somber reminder of the devastation, the chaos, the trauma, and loss of so many innocent lives that Tuesday morning. Each person going through their own horrific experience, from those inside the elevators to those at windows on the world, to the people trapped inside conference rooms, to the first responders and volunteers who risked everything and never made it back home, to those who thought they'd made it to safety, unaware of the dangers coming from above, to the people who were lucky enough to make it back home but were never able to forget what they saw and heard while there. Every article written, every heartbreaking voicemail left from those inside the airplanes and inside of the towers, every phone call made from those who had no escape, the ones who were forced to say one final goodbye when they weren't yet ready to leave this earth. It all paints a picture of what unfolded. These are stories we have to keep telling, names we have to keep saying, faces we have to always remember, and not ever let them become distant memories. They'll forever live on in the hearts of family and friends from all over. There's no doubt about that. But for those unable to grasp the sheer magnitude of this event, it's extremely important that it's always remembered. These innocent people meant much more than that one day. We remember them for the good times, the memories created, the love and light they brought to those around them, those they left behind. They should all still be here today, and they all deserve their stories to be told, to never be forgotten. If alive today, Yvette would be 47 years old and celebrating her 48th birthday next month. Rest in peace to Yvette Nicole Moreno. My deepest condolences go out to her family and loved ones. And rest in peace to all the innocent lives lost in September of 2001. You'll never be forgotten.